Perfect.
Thank you. A to both of you for this.
Thank you.
So typically if you take a philosophy class, is it running?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. They'll divide things into, Leighton's gonna be distracted the whole day now looking at the screen. Things like metaphysics and logic. One of the categories is epistemology. I prefer not to teach that way, to kind of break things up into these categories, because I think they're somewhat artificial. But for our purposes today, I think it's really helpful to understand Kant, to look back at the question of epistemology. Epistemology is pistis or pisti is knowledge. Logos is study. So this is that curious thing that philosophers do. They're not necessarily trying to gain knowledge, but they're studying the nature of knowledge itself. Right? So these kinds of questions. How is it possible for us to know something or anything? And oftentimes, this famous, philosophy can become famous for, has become famous for skepticism, like how can you prove that your hand is really out there? How do you know? It could just be a dream. So that's something that some philosophers do. But you don't have to necessarily follow that. We can still wonder, like, how is it possible for us to know things? What is the difference between knowledge and opinion, or difference between knowledge and belief? And Plato talked about this to some extent, right? Now, the people in the cave believe they have the truth. Turns out it's just an opinion. And they're not necessarily wrong, but they're wrong when they say this is all there is, right? But shadows are real, they're just not as real as other things. And they're the product of other realities. So how can we determine the difference, and what is it that would make the difference between true knowledge and mere opinion or belief? Because again, in the cave, it feels like true knowledge to them, right? When you believe something really strongly, it feels true. Stephen Colbert invented the word truthiness about a decade ago. I don't know if you guys remember, heard that. He said, I don't really believe in truth. I believe in truthiness. If it feels right, it's right. Philosophers don't necessarily agree. And then this, which is kind of what we're going to look at today. When we know, so let's just grant that it's possible to have knowledge. But when we know what's going on, how does that work? Right? What does it mean? What does it involve to actually know something? That's epistemology. So as you saw in the video, these are two most relevant for us. We'll talk about a third. Two basic answers to this, and you can trace these back to two of the founders of Western philosophy. Here with Plato, and here with his student Aristotle. So let's begin with Aristotle, just because it's at the top. Empiricism, in general, is the idea that when I come to know things, it's kind of a process of accretion. It's a process of little things happening in me. Over time, I become more and more familiar with things, and then I gain knowledge of them. So I experience chairs, I experience tables. I don't really know what they are, but over time, through lots and lots of experiences with them, I eventually come to recognize something as a chair or a table or a friend or justice or whatever it is. This is normally what we call learning. We tend to think that learning is something that, you gotta have a lot of experience and then it ultimately sort of builds. science is very often characterized in empiricist terms. Because scientists are supposed to go out into the world and observe, right? Supposed to gain experiences, direct experiences with whatever it is they're studying, and observe it for a long time in lots of different ways, so that eventually the truth or the meaning of what they're observing will sort of arise from within their experience. Now, rationalism argues, doesn't deny that experience happens, and it doesn't deny that we can learn from experience. What it says is, experience can't actually teach us anything on its own. In order for us to learn from experience, we have to have concepts. We have to have rules. We have to already have an idea or a sense of how to learn and how to think clearly, so that when we're bombarded with colors and shapes and, you know, all this stuff, we can organize it and make sense of it, and that requires ideas or concepts. So, if you want to just talk about, you know, things like chairs and tables and all of that, obviously you have to learn that from experience, because these are things, you know, tangible and physical in the world. But what about something like logic, right? Basic rules of logic. Something like A equals A. Well, that seems so basic. Why does it seem so basic? A rationalist is going to say, because your mind, right, is built to understand logic. And your mind, and someone didn't have to teach you this. This is kind of part of what it means to be human. And doing little syllogisms and little arguments. These are the kinds of things that a rationalist is going to say. No experience with tables and chairs and sunlight and clouds and whatever is going to teach you those rules of thought. Those have to be there, and if you don't have them, you can't learn from experience. You can't really put things together coherently, because what it means to be coherent is to use the rules of logic. Right? And those rules of logic seem to be conditions. They seem to be necessary for you to take your experience and put it together in what we call knowledge. So they're going to argue that in some sense, key ideas, not table or chair, but ideas of logic, ideas of reasoning. They would argue, many of them would argue mathematics is evidence of this. Right, because mathematics doesn't refer to things. Right? You don't say 2 oranges plus 2 oranges equals 4 oranges. That's not how you do math. Say 2 plus 2 equals 4. So it doesn't matter what you're talking about. If you have 2 of something, and you add 2 of something, you get 4 of something. Right? Okay, so these are 2 historical schools of thought that argue back and forth. Let me pause here. There's some questions, some observations. Any issues around these? Which of these seems truer for you?
The first one makes more sense to me, I guess.
Yeah? Say more.
I don't know, like, I guess I learned a lot from, like, certain things that happened to me, so I guess that's my opinion on how I gain knowledge.
Yeah. So you can think back to kind of specific events, right, that happened to you, and you're like, that's what taught me a lesson or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Totally feedback. Giving your, it's a perfect, right? Based on your experience. Does learning feel more like this to you or this? Empiricism? Yeah?
Like, I understand the second one though, and how that could be part of it too.
You have some example there?
I mean, just like that. I don't know. It's just kind of in there,
Mhm.
you know?
Mhm.
Could you give us an example of a rationalism? Like that?
Well, those would be some. But even with things like this, so it's not quite clear how an empiricist says this is gonna happen. So let's give an example of a rationalist answer, which is kind of a critique of empiricism, showing why empiricism can't be the model. So let's talk about chairs, okay? How we learned that this is a chair. We all agreed that it's a chair? So we're not gonna play the skeptical game. How do you know it's out there? Maybe you're dreaming, okay? It's a chair, we all have knowledge that it's a chair. How does that process work? Let's take the empiricist claim. The empiricist claim would be, in your past, you had experience with lots of chairs. Right? So you're 1 year old, you're 2 years old, you're 3 years old, you're seeing chairs. At some point, because of course we're asking how did that knowledge happen, right? How did you come to that knowledge? You can't say you knew the first time you encountered this thing that it was a chair. We're asking how did you learn and gain knowledge that it was a chair. So the first time you see this, let's say you're 1 year old and the first time you see this, right? What is it that you see?
Something that people sit in?
Okay, so you might see other people
Because
using it, right? Good. What else do you see? Like, what do you see now?
Spins around.
What's that?
Spins around.
Okay,
Is
it's
it a toy?
moving.
It's plastic.
Plastic, although as a child you might not
Yeah.
have that, right? But you definitely probably see gray, you see some black, you see a shape. So it has these qualities, right? And if you touch it and feel it, it might be soft, or it might be this or that, it might be heavy. If you run into it, it might hurt you. You say, oh, that's hard. So you have access through experience, even before you know what something is. You have access to, let's call them qualities, like color and shape and hardness, and smoothness, things like that. But the next chair you see isn't going to be this one. And it might be soft, and it might be red, and it might be made of cloth, and it might be, right? So now you have two experiences, one with gray and black in this shape and hard, another one with red and soft and a different material. So are those the same thing? I don't know how you would, you might see people both sitting in them both, right? That might be, but is it the same person? So let's add a third. It's a black chair made out of leather, etc. Let's add a fourth. It's a stool without a back. Like we could sit up here and list dozens and dozens and maybe hundreds of different kinds of chairs. Certainly different colors, right? So the rationalist would ask, okay, explain to me exactly how those experiences, which are all experiences of individual events, how do those things become known to you as one kind of thing, a chair, if they have different qualities?
They're all roughly the same shape.
Roughly? suppose maybe they all have a horizontal and a vertical, all those stools don't, you know? But maybe you say it's not really a chair, we call it a stool. It's something, okay, but isn't this shape replicated by lots of other things that are not chairs? Aren't there lots of things that have sort of an L shape to them?
Without the height of the people sitting down.
So
Or roughly the same height and the same shape.
So something relative to the height.
The height of the people.
The height of it, okay? So then you sort of see it as related to human function, as we started out with, like people are using it in a certain way, right? So you could definitely find some ways of connecting them. This is what the rationalist is going to say. Who taught you how to take different experiences and compare them and put them together? Even if there are quote unquote clues right within height and how did you know to do that? Because these are back in your memory now, right? Like before you know it's a chair, you might have 100 encounters with what we would call chairs. You don't know those are encounters with chairs. All you get is the information from each event. Maybe there are some similarities that kind of we can see, but how do you know to look for similarities?
You just do.
Just, right, that's not really an explanation.
No.
Right? Which is to say, it's suggesting that there's some intellectual activity that you have to perform in order to say all these things eventually become one thing, a chair, a category of chair. And that's what rationalists emphasize. In order for us to become knowledgeable about something even as simple as the category of chair, it's not enough for stuff to just happen to us, for us to just have experiences. So this is one of the ways that you'll see that these differ. Empiricists will say that learning is primarily a passive process. What do we mean by that? We say it's passive.
Like, you don't have to try, it just happens.
Right, it doesn't take effort, it happens to us. When we receive the information, the shapes of the colors, the feelings, right, we receive things, and once we receive enough of the same kind of thing, it sort of becomes one thing for us. But the rationalist points out that even if you have many of the same experiences, like even if the range of chairs that you are exposed to as a young child are pretty similar and close to this, there's still the question of how did you know, right, that you were supposed to take all of those memories and then sort of put them together into one category. That's an activity, that's something you have to do. How did you know how to do that? There must be, you must already have some rules or something within you that tells you I need to think about what I've experienced so that I can understand it. So the rationalist argues that we actually need to use concepts or rules to give order to the things that we experience. Let me give you what I take to be kind of a fun example. It comes from two places. St. Augustine, remember him? Yes. The evil guy? We're all evil, deep down. And then a 20th century philosopher who sort of takes up his example of Ludwig Wittgenstein. Yeah. So, he says, imagine that you are at a construction site. And you don't have language, you don't have concepts. Or, all you really need to say is, you don't have any shared concepts or language with the person in charge of the construction site. Right? So you have your experience, they have their experience, they have their language, you have your language, and you're in a common place. And that foreman is trying to show you what you're supposed to do, right? So the foreman wants you to go over to this log and move it to the other side of the yard. How are they going to teach you? How are they going to have you understand what they want? Well, what are some of the strategies that you might use? If you're the foreman and you're trying to get me, who doesn't know your language, to do that, to move a log from one side to the other. Some of the ways you might do that. You have no ideas?
You might like shovel.
Show them. Okay, so how do you do that?
You pick up the
Oh,
log.
so you do it yourself, right? So I
Yeah.
might like over here and, right?
Then you can
Okay,
point
so,
out.
so I'm here, and I'm watching you do that. How does that tell me that I'm supposed to do it?
Gestures.
What
Like-
gestures? Like what? Okay, so let's play this. Come on, stand up. Okay, you're the foreman. So you're gonna teach me what I'm supposed to do.
Okay, so would you just wanna use like the chair as an example? Like,
Oh, sure.
like I'll move the chair?
Yeah, if you're not happy with imaginary
So
logs, I'll use a real chair.
Okay, Oh my gosh. I mean, I feel like most people wouldn't just sit down.
Okay, gesture.
I mean, I did tell, I
You
mean,
did gesture.
but then I said,
You can be aggressive. Put it in his hand.
Oh, then I'm watching this.
oh, okay, someone else
Okay,
try it. I'm
right?
bad at this.
No, you're not bad.
Now
at
people
it.
are gonna watch this on their
Yeah, oh,
at
I'm
home
sorry,
and be
that-
like, what a weirdo.
That was on video? Oh. All
Right
right,
in the.
so the example Wittgenstein gives is this, right? Let's say, so the foreman, you tried that, like, point to me, you pantomime, right? But what's the problem?
They still don't get it?
Why not?
Didn't you put it in their hands and then push them and then do it again? And then
Like, that's
push
what I
them
was
and
trying to
then it
do,
again?
like, I was trying to
Until
do-
they, like,
And I might think it's a cool log dance.
And then they're in the routine of doing the cool log dance, but they're performing the task.
Right, but then I don't understand. How's she gonna teach me? Well, you can point, but who taught me what pointing means? Did you have these problems with your dogs? You guys have dogs?
Yeah.
You ever point at dogs like over there and they just look at your finger?
Yes.
Right? You said gesture, but how do I know what that is a gesture? How do I know it's not just a movement and you want me to look at the movement? You intended to point beyond itself, right? But something like this, wasn't pointing beyond itself. It was, look at my hands. So how do I know? Someone has to teach me what those gestures, but you can't teach me. How do you teach me? By pointing at the pointing?
Through
By gesturing about the
experience.
gestures? Right? So again, this is a kind of point that rationalists will make, that if we want to say, if we want to look at human knowledge merely as, oh, a bunch of stuff happens and then I just learn it, it's missing the crucial element. And I call it intelligence. But not intelligence about this or about that, but intelligence in terms of how to take the experiences that people, that happen to you, including people pointing and all of that, like how to take all that and to organize it so that it makes sense, so that you know it and understand it.
So this is like just like that cave story, like when they come out and they're like, they don't know what anything is. 'Cause they don't have like the background.
Yeah, remember the one thread in the cave story that keeps running back and forth is the similar shape,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because
yeah.
you have the shape of the silhouette of the, and then you have the shape of the puppets, and you have the shape of the real animals, and, right? But yeah, this is, I mean, Plato doesn't make this argument, but I think it would fall in with his point of view, which is what happens to us is part of the story. What we do with our experience is what matters. And what we do with it is a function of something different from experiences, different from colors and shapes. It's how we think. Can we think clearly? And only if we can think clearly about our experience can we hope to have knowledge. That's the rationalist perspective. So what are the rules of thinking? What are the ways that we should think? You see the difference? The reason rationalism, I think, is a little harder to grasp is that it's pointing to things that you do so subconsciously, you don't really recognize that you're doing them. A rationalist is going to say they have to be there. Now, another side of rationalism, which I think would be relevant, is its metaphysical interest, and this means meta is a kind of beyond. Sorry, markers are. And this takes us back to Plato, because if you remember, in his obsession with something like justice, he argued that justice is one of the most important, if not the most important question that human beings can ask about their own lives and about society. But he also argued that this thing that is most important, absolutely essential, is an idea. It can't be tasted or smelt or touched. It can only be grasped by the mind. So Plato believed that ideas are real. Not only real, they're the most real things, because any picture of a triangle that I draw is just a copy of the real idea, and the real idea gives it its meaning. And not a whole lot of distance from that to God, right? So rationalists tend to be convinced that there is a kind of second realm or, deeper, higher, if we want, whatever metaphor you want to use, for reality, which is not physical, it's not subject to change, it's an eternal realm. Empiricists tended to be more practical and more skeptical of any of these. Okay, again, let me pause for some questions on this, responses. We're going to get to Kant in a minute. Questions? So, much of philosophy was concerned, before Kant was concerned with metaphysical debates, what is really real, ideas, or physical things, rationalist, empiricist, all kinds of variations on this. It was really real. What's at the bottom of everything? And at the center of this, or a big piece of it, was how can we know? Which is what we've just been talking about. So Immanuel Kant comes along. He's pretty old, actually, by the time he begins to develop some new ideas about this. So he's trained in all this stuff. He knows all this stuff backwards and forwards. But one day it dawns on him that both of these schools of thought forgot to ask a basic question. Just completely overlooked a basic question. The empiricist says we learn from from experience. The rationalist says we have meaningful experience because we bring concepts to it and we organize it and categorize it. We don't learn those things from experience. But Kant asks a different question. And that is, how is experience itself possible? So don't tell me we learn from experience if you can't tell me what experience is. Experience is a pretty big word, right? You're doing it right now. Or it's happening to you. I'm not sure which it is, right? But you are experiencing things right now. Kant wants to know, how is that possible? Because if we can't understand how that's possible, empiricism is out the window, right? You can't tell me, I have a theory of an account of how knowledge is possible. It comes from experience, but I don't know how experience happens, right? See, that's not an explanation. The rationalists had a different problem. The rationalists love to get off on all of this high abstract concept stuff, and they would spin their wheels in all of these ideas and all these rules and logic and all of this. And it was really unclear how they could bring this stuff back into experience and help us really understand the world around us. It seemed like a bunch of intellectual gymnastics after a while. So Kant wants us to understand how knowledge is possible, but he thinks we have to ask beforehand, how is experience itself possible? So let me give you a sense of why that question comes about. gonna point out that every experience is an experience of something, right? So right now you have an experience of being in a classroom with me around. Other times you have experience of driving down the road. Other times you have experience of drinking coffee. Like, there's always things involved in experience. Even memories, right? That's an experience of things of the past. Things of the past. So experience has this character of always being filled with something. It's always, right, contained. There's something always there. And there's always a there, right? You're always in some place when you experience. Well, let's begin with that. You're in a place right now. It's called a room in a college, right? And that room has a lot of things in it. You're experiencing those things. Kant's not doubting that you're experiencing it. But how is it possible that you can experience things that are not inside you? How is it possible that you can experience space outside of you? Well, you say, well, I'm in that space. How could I not experience it? What do you mean? So that desk, the row of cabinets back there, right? They're in the place that I'm in. We share this place. That's part of my experience. You're in the place. I'm in the place where, right? We're all in this place. But how is it possible? I can be in a place, I could be this desk, but it's not experiencing itself in that place, is it? I think we don't think that it is. We don't know, right? So it's possible for me to be in a place, but not experience that place. So how is it possible that I can experience a place that I'm in?
Your senses?
Okay, my senses. So give me an example of.
Like, I experienced that desk because I looked at it. And
Because you
maybe
looked
I
at it.
touched it.
Right. Did you touch the desk? Well, look, do you see the desk?
Yeah,
You do.
I do.
And you're experiencing seeing the desk, right? So because of your senses, so tell me how vision works.
You look at it. I don't know how to explain
So
how
you
that
open
works.
your eyes. Well, what if there was no light? Would you still see it?
No.
No, so there has to be light, but how do you see the light? The light's invisible, but and somehow you believe it enables you, but it doesn't carry, light isn't like a truck, right, that carries the desk to your eyes, right?
Well, the desk is reflecting the light back.
Okay, so the desk is out here, it's not in your head. If we're talking about your senses are contained within your body, right? So the desk isn't carried into your body for you to experience it. Somehow there's a reflection. We have a theory of light that somehow there's light here hitting this, and then the light bounces towards your eyes and it hits your eyes, right? But again, the desk isn't hitting your eyes. The light is hitting your eyes. Is the light, now the Stoics, ancient philosophers, they had a theory that when light hit something, it took the shape of that thing, and like little tiny desk packets, right, were hitting your eyes and then hit your brain, and then that's how they thought that it actually carried the shape of things. But we know that's not true. We know light is just in a wave. So something about the frequency of that wave hits your eyeball, right? And then that hits your nerve, and then the nerves, and then stuff happens. But where's the experience?
In your mind?
In your mind. So this desk that you are experiencing is in your mind?
I mean, if, like, the concept of it,
I'm not talking about the concept of it. I'm talking about this desk. Is it in your mind?
I'm thinking about it, so I'm looking at
So
it.
it's in your mind?
Well, not physically, but
Oh, so how is it, so is it not a physical thing that you're experiencing?
I don't know how to explain this.
Well, the experience is seeing the desk, actively looking.
Yeah, I'm asking though, is the desk in your mind?
No.
Or is the desk outside of you?
It's outside of
You
me.
experience it as outside of you, but
Yeah.
the story we just told, right, tells you that your experience of the desk is something that's happening internally, right? Neural chemicals and electronic waves are doing stuff in your head. That's kind of the end point of you seeing the desk,
Mhm.
right? So what do we mean when you say you see the desk? Are you seeing what's out here? Or are you seeing something inside your head?
That's the result of,
You're processing in your head
Yeah.
the reflection of the light from the physical.
Right, so the desk that you see is in your head,
Yeah.
not outside of you.
Well,
but
the
you
desk
exper-
that you're processing in your head
Right.
is in the physical world.
It's in your brain.
You're processing the light in your brain.
Well, it's not light anymore, but yeah, there's the chemical and the electronic
You're
motions.
You're processing the image hitting your
No,
retina.
there's no image.
The light
Right,
that
the
your
frequency.
retina is
Yes.
processing is an image in your brain.
So if I opened up her brain as she's looking at this, I would see a little desk? There's an image in there?
In the right part of her brain.
An image? Like if I had a microscope, I could see a little desk inside her head?
I don't know.
Right? No, so I'm not saying this to be skeptical. This is not about skepticism. This is Kant's point. He realizes, sort of like what I said about empiricism, that if you have an experience of this on at 1 second, then you have the experience of that in another second, an experience of that in another second. That doesn't mean it's the same thing. Right? You have to somehow have a way inside you of saying, these things should be connected so that I can say that's the same desk or that's the same kind of thing. If I show you this desk and a different shaped one and a different shaped one, it's not clear how that's going to become the idea of a desk. Unless you have something inside you that says, this is how I should put these different experiences together into one category. Similarly, Kant is going to say that for experience itself, he's going to say that we have experience, and experience always comes with a basic structure, very, very basic structure. No matter if it's experience of a student sitting in front of me, or experience of the clouds in the sky, or whatever, it has a basic structure that's always there. There are things in experience, and there are places that those things occur. You can't have an experience that doesn't occur with some kind of space or place. You can't have an experience unless there's something. And it could be yourself, you could be the thing, right? You could think about
I'm
yourself.
so confused though.
Go ahead.
So how do you experience something?
Well, I'm getting to this. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm getting the answer. I actually will give you an answer. Okay, believe it or not. What he's saying is that we have overlooked the complexity of our experience. We've misunderstood it. We have told ourselves, sort of like you did in saying that we learn empirically through empiricism, we mistakenly think of experience as a passive thing. There's something out there, the light hits me, and boom, I have an image. He says that can't be the case. That's impossible. What has to be happening is the world hits you with different things from outside and inside, so you have internal experiences as well, right? Stomach growling and feelings, but let's just talk about vision to simplify it. So you experience things in the world, and they seem to be really out there. That's what it means to experience it, right? But in fact, if there are things in the world that are, in this case, bouncing light waves towards you, if that's true, he says then what must be happening every time you have an experience is as stuff comes at you, waves of light, it hits you, and then the real work begins. You have to have already a knowledge, not something you've thought about. It has to be kind of already there to tell you when stuff comes at me and enters my senses, this is how I have to put it together to make it into an experience. I have to organize it into objects I have to organize it into places.
What about like a
And
smell?
what he's saying is, we are the ones who put our experiences together. This is his point. We, sometimes we call it construct experiences. The world gives us just raw data, light waves that hit us, sound waves that hit us, right? Things on our skin, temperature, like these things happen to us, but those are not experiences. Experience is only possible if we are creatures who can take all that mess of stuff happening to us, and it's not even objects yet, right? Light waves are not objects. It's just stuff hitting us. We take all of that now inside, and somehow we must have a way of taking all that jumble and mess and reorganizing it and putting it together as a coherent kind of thing we call experience. If we can't do that, those things would just cause chaos inside us. We wouldn't have experience. Is that a hand?
Yeah, I mean, you said something that, what did you say? Sorry. You said something about how, like, we create our own experiences, kind of.
Yeah.
And I'm just wondering if that's, like, similar to solipsism.
Absolutely. Some
Okay.
people have accused Kant ultimately of being a solipsist.
Okay.
He would try to resist that, but yes, it can eventually, if you take it seriously enough and you follow it all the way down, you can say, well, then you have your own little world, you have your own little world, you have your own little world, and I can never get in there because I'm outside,
Yeah.
right? And no matter what I say or do, it's just coming to you as sound, and then you put it together,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Excellent question. Now, Kant is going to say that that's maybe one side of what he's saying. The other side is, and now he's assuming we can kind of communicate, I guess, right? He's gonna say, I'm gonna tell you the basic structure of my experience, and you tell me if it's roughly the same thing,
Mm-hmm.
right? You don't see yourself sitting in a chair right now, but you see a person out here in a room. I don't see myself, but I see right? So whenever I have an experience, it occurs in a place, and it occurs with things, different kinds of things, and then stuff happens. But beyond that, he's going to say, I experience things like cause and effect, right? So if I do that, that causes a sound, and it's built into my experience. My experience doesn't seem to even be possible if there isn't a basic causal relationship between things. Now, science investigates how the specific causes work, but experience itself already knows if something happens, it affects something else. Just like A equals A, he thinks. It's just as basic as that. But it's not what I'm thinking, it's how I put experience together. I put it together in such a way that one event leads to another event. And if you say, yeah, that's how my experience happens too. Now we have a shared world, in a sense, right? But there's still that element of, but that world that I experience is always something coming out of me, in a sense. It's something I'm producing or projecting, right? So even the people around me are, in some sense, projections of the experience that I've put together.
Right.
But you seem to put your experience together in the same way that I do, at the most general level, into cause and effect, space and time. He's going to say also, none of us has experience of time going backwards, but that's because when stuff happens to us, we seem to have a rule, again, not a rule that we learn, but just to have an experience, you have to have a process that says, let's put experience together in this way. The time has this structure. I'm not expecting you to just, oh yeah, okay, we're good. This is a deep, deep, troubling, profound, interesting, crazy, weird idea,
Yeah.
argument. But there's a lot of people talk about philosophy before Kant, and then they talk about philosophy after Kant. And you know, when you talk that way, someone's very, very important. He really shifted the whole way we think about philosophy. Think about knowledge, etc. But this is a lot of stuff here. So other questions and responses right now. I don't want to race ahead. Have you ever asked yourself this question?
No.
Do you see a parallel? So the little skit that we had, so embarrassing for that to be on video. Right? That was making the point that if you're trying to teach someone something, and if they're going to learn, they have to already kind of know how to learn. In this case, they would have to know what pointing means. Or they'd have to know you're trying to teach them something, right? So you were doing your thing with your hands to try to pull me over here, and I'm like, oh, we're gonna dance. Like, I didn't think you were even trying to teach me anything. So I already have to have the resources for knowing how to know, or knowing how to learn for you to teach me. That was the lesson there. Kant is saying the same thing about experience. I already have to have the rules for creating an experience to have an experience.
So, we don't necessarily learn that, we just know that? How to like create an experience, is what he's saying?
Yeah, so he's saying, well, I'll do it here because I have the lights down. Experience, that is any experience, any possible experience of an infant or an adult or a Martian or whatever, okay? Any possible, if for there to be experience, something like this. It depends on any possible experience, depends on rules we have for putting it together. Now again, don't be fooled by this idea of rules where he thinks every time light hits my eye, I consciously say, what are the rules? No. Right? But if I don't have knowledge, who's the I here? We could call it our subconscious or our body or something. But if whoever is receiving sensory information from the world doesn't have the knowledge or the skill for organizing it and putting it together into an experience, you won't have an experience. Experience is impossible unless it is being put together. And the world can't put experience together for us. Right? It's just giving us sound and shape and colors. We are responsible for putting it together as an experience. Does that help? So he calls this, he didn't invent this term, but a priori knowledge. What he means is knowledge that must be there before any experience can happen. Okay, this is maybe a bit of a weird parallel, but it just occurred to me. Remember Paley's argument about the watchmaker? Right? He's arguing, if you encounter a watch in the woods, you have to presume there's a designer, or someone who put it together, right? Because it has a certain structure. So Kant is making a similar kind of argument about experience itself. In order for you to experience a world outside of you in space and time with objects and cause and effect, that can't just happen because the world is out there with cause and effect. Because the only way you can experience it is for stuff to come to you. But once it comes to you, you have to assemble it back into something that has cause and effect in space and time. There's a difference between me and the desk. The desk doesn't experience. There's still light hitting the desk, right? But it doesn't have the capacity for taking that and turning it into an experience. So because, it's like the watch, you say, because our experience has a structure and an order to it, we call it cause and effect. We call it space and time. These are just words for the kind of way that experience is ordered. Because it has that, there must be, quote unquote, a designer, right? There must be an intelligence putting it together. And he says that intelligence obviously is somewhere inside us, because we're the ones producing the experience. Make sense? Yeah?
So like, what would you call that? Like understanding, or just
Call what?
just like the whole like process in your head?
So he calls it, I think it's a good word. Something like, calls it synthesis. So in the video, and I'm not going to talk about this because I don't think it's all that, but remember we talked about the synthetic a priori? This is synthesis is just means syn is together, right? And thesis is kind of weaving, so it's weaving things together. The opposite of synthesis, anyone know? Analysis. Analysis is taking something that's whole and breaking it down into its parts. Somehow we must know how to perform this synthesis in order to make experience. If we didn't know how to do it, he says, we wouldn't have experiences. In contemporary psychology, I can say most psychologists today, and here we're talking about people who study perception and the different kinds of experiences that we have, they agree with Kant. They try to verify and study his insights in lots of specific ways, but let me just give you one that I find to be very compelling. It really makes Kant's point well. It's called you can look this up, it's fascinating, the binding problem. Anyone ever study psychology hear about the binding problem? So, the binding problem is something like this. I experience this thing as a single object, right? And so do you, I assume. There it is, there's an object. Now, Kant would point out that, in fact, this experience is occurring over time. And it's a bit of a mystery how time 1, time 2, time 3, time 4, and again, if we're saying the world is sort of hitting us and things are happening, how is it that I continue to experience this as a single thing across those different times? But I do, right? So he's going to say that's built into experience. It's kind of a rule. He calls it continuity. But that's just time. I experience this thing and it has lots of qualities, right? So it has different colors, it has shape, it has a certain weight to it when I touch it, certain quality of smoothness. Right? It has all of these things. But notice what I'm saying. It has all of these qualities. But no. Psychologists recognize that some of those qualities are coming, not even, some of those things are visual, right? So the shape of it, well, the shape is coming in two ways. Shape is coming visually, I can look at it, but also tactily, right? I'm getting shape. But, wait, what's going on here? I'm getting, neural signals from my hands up to here, and I'm getting visual signals through my eyes up to here. Who the hell tells me that those things go together as part of one thing? Why am I not experiencing one thing, right, that has this kind of shape, and another thing that may have the same shape, but the one thing, right, is coming through here, and the other thing's coming through my eyes? Why am I not experiencing two different things with the same shape? And when I get different colors, how do I know to keep them together, right? The light hits at different frequencies. Okay, now that's all in my brain. What tells me that I'm supposed to put them together and experience them as one object, the same object? It's entirely possible, and in fact, there are people who have neurological disorders that where they lose this ability to some extent, and they begin to experience like different things, like the different things that we experience as one are kind of splintered off because their different senses are not connecting. But who tells it how to connect? This is the binding problem. And it's exactly Kant's kind of thing. It's not denying that we have experience. It's not denying that we have knowledge. But it's recognizing that in order for that to be possible, a whole hell of a lot has to be going on inside us. It has to be ordered. There have to be like rules that we possess in order to keep this thing experienced as a single object with different qualities, as opposed to just a bunch of different qualities. It's a puzzle, huh? See the puzzle? And so all of these qualities coming from different modalities, and even, different qualities within the same. These are all visual things, but again, how do we know they come together? To form the single object that we experience. So Kant's basic argument is that our experience is built to produce a world that is ordered. And the basic way it's ordered is 3: space, time, and objects. But objects are not simple. It's a lot that has to be going on for me to take all the different things happening and put them together and to say, okay, all these different qualities go with this object, all these different qualities go to that object, these stay together over time. If I have those rules, then I can have experience. But your question looms always in the background. Okay, Kant, are you saying that our experiences are all kind of dreams? Right? Because when you go to bed at night, if you dream, I have a friend who's never dreamt. Isn't that weird? I think he's an alien. If you go, you're experiencing things, but we know that's all internal, right? The world isn't doing anything to you. That's all internal. But we're capable of producing fantasies. We're capable of producing dreams. It's sometimes hard to see how Kant is saying our waking life isn't sort of a dream, because we're putting it together. Right? Now, is it going that far? People have argued for a couple centuries now about that. But one of the things that he does, I know is very confusing. It's good for you to be introduced. It was this whole thing about the phenomenal and the noumenal. Basically, what he says is, now once we recognize that every experience that we ever have is in part the product of our own internal processes to put it together in an orderly way, he says that means we can never step outside of experience and say, no, there really is a chair out there with these qualities and this shape before I experience it. He says it's impossible ever for us to say that. Because the only access I have to anything comes through my experience. And my experience isn't just sitting here having the world throw images at me. Far from it. The experience is for me to take, right, the jumble of materials I have, colors and shapes and sounds, and put them together into a world. That's my doing. So the noumenal world, not really a world. I mean, he just basically says, there could be a world beyond our experience, but it'd be impossible for us to prove it. Because proving it would have to be done within our experience. And our experience is always something we are shaping and creating. Okay, hard to tell from your facial expressions at this point what you're going through.